Hi, everyone. Welcome to a brand new Film Music Media conversation. I'm sitting here with composer Corey Wallace. Corey, thank you so much for taking time to sit down today.
Thank you, Kai. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. So, to start off, I've been asking this question to composers, and it may sound like a simple question, but it also, I think, has much deeper possibilities of what your answer could be, and it's been so different for everybody. So I'm curious what yours is going to be, and as you can take it however you see this question, as you know, however you take it. So, as a composer, as a musician, as a person, as a human being, I'm curious, what does music mean to you?
Oh man, you had to start with a really tough one, didn't you? Um, man, I mean, music just ended up being the outlet that I know where I fell in love with, what I was doing with it.
Yeah.
I as a I was really into math and science, in school, and I actually started out as an industrial engineering major at the University of Wisconsin. But I
Oh,
played in
wow.
jazz band. I took a composition course. I really loved music ever since I was a kid, and so I wanted to keep that music education alive while I was at school. I was at college, and eventually it just dawned on me that this is the thing that I'm pouring most of myself into, is the thing I spend most of my time doing, even though I'm not getting actual school credit for it. And I just love doing it the most. So it just makes sense that I should do this as much as I possibly can. So I was never, even though I was, if I may say, I was pretty smart, but I wasn't a very good student. I was kind of
Mm.
lazy. But I realized that my effort, was being put into something that it's because I love doing it. That's why I'm putting all this effort into it. It kind of dawned on me that that's what I should be doing with my life, and here we are.
Wow, that's awesome. So, yeah, that's interesting that you didn't go to school for you went for engineering. That's so fascinating.
Well, I started out in engineering, and then I after a couple years, I switched over and made music my full time major, and
Nice.
then geared towards getting into USC's scoring for motion pictures and television program, and kind of funneling myself towards a career in film music once I decided
Yeah,
to make the change.
absolutely. So let's rewind back. I'm curious, when do you remember a point in your life that music kind of entered it? Was there like a sudden thing where it's like, oh my God, look at this? Or was something gradual? Did you not really realize it at first that you were interested in it? Or was there like, do you remember like a catalyst moment at all in your life where music just kind of started becoming an interest?
Music or film music?
Music in general, just when you were aware of music.
Oh, I mean, that was just from an early age. I didn't take piano lessons or anything like that, but I went to a school that had a really good music education program, the playing the recorder and
Yeah.
studying different eras of music history in elementary school, and playing in the high school in the band. And then in high school, my band director, Dr. Daniel Brand, he was really influential figure in getting me interested in all kinds of different types of music, as well as music theory. Like, it's not common that high schools even offer a music theory program, but
Right.
that's when I learned about voice leading and different types of harmonizations, and it was really the start of my composition career. Kind of to back up a little bit, my older brother is more of the natural musician of the family. He's the type of guy that can pick up instruments and just play them, or learn to play them really quickly. So he played guitar and played piano, and we got a piano in the house because of him. And that's about age 11 or so. It's when I started composing.
Yeah.
I had a little music book, and I would play a little melody on top and write it down, play a little bass line, write it down, maybe put something in the middle. And I started thinking, oh, music composition's easy. You just put something on top, on the bottom, and in the middle. And it sounds kind of silly, but at the same time, that's kind of what music is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, well, yeah, when did you become aware of film music, and when did you want to make that? I mean, understandably, I know you wanted to make it your career while you were already engineering school. So I'm curious, when were you aware of it and were you like, okay, I'm pivoting and this is what I want to do with my life?
Well, the pivot happened because I was taking composition courses, and my friend Evan Pessis, who was a film major at Wisconsin, if I did mention before, University of Wisconsin Madison,
Yeah.
and he had done a little noir student film and asked me if I wanted to score it, because he's the only person I was the only person he knew that was writing music. So I said yes. I didn't know how it was going to go, how long it would take, and I didn't really know anything about film music technology. This was back in 2004. I did the whole thing with a VCR and a piano and paper and pencil, and I used a stopwatch and a metronome to figure out the timings of things. Very, very primitive technology, but I absolutely loved it. I fell in love with the process. I fell in love with the idea of putting music to picture. I always thought the idea of the blank page was very nebulous, and I didn't quite know how to structure music that I was writing or where to take it. But once I got the picture and the music now fits against the picture, everything took shape for me, and I liked that part of it, putting it into those parameters, into that box. So that's what I just kind of fell in love with that process. But to answer your question, the first time I really noticed film music in general was the 20th century logo music, because I used to watch, among our VHS collection when I was a kid, was the Star Wars trilogy on VHS. And the 20th century music logo that came up for Star Wars was almost more iconic to me than the Star Wars music itself. It came up maybe just because it came first, and it just got me really excited to watch Star Wars, even more than the Star Wars theme. The logo music got me excited to watch Star Wars.
Yeah, that's one of the, I mean, that's probably top tier, like of all the studio logos, like 20th Century Fox definitely at the top.
And then when I was
Century
about
Studios now.
and then when I was about 11 or 12, when Jurassic Park came out, I went to go see that. And in the journey to the island, when the first time we hear that theme, bum 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 bum, the first time we hear that with the helicopter going to the island, I kept noticing that every time they cut outside the helicopter, they would talk inside the helicopter, but then cut to the exterior with the waterfall, with the mountains, with the ocean, and the theme and the trumpets would play every time they cut, and it was the dialogue would happen, then they'd clear the dialogue, and the theme would happen. And I was like, how did they get that to work? How did they get that to sync up to picture so perfectly? And that was kind of the beginning of my, journey towards music sync, if you will.
Yeah, no, I remember when I think Jurassic Park was the first movie I saw in a theater. I was 6 years old, so it was 93. And I remember I had like one of those, it was like a kid's book that was just like tying with the movie, but it just showed like scenes. And I remember sitting in the theater flipping through the book and making sure that the scene matched up with what I was seeing on the screen. So I was already like, thinking in like structure and stuff. It's so weird how our brains will just like start like, okay, let's pick it up and see why does this work, like.
Right.
So let's talk about, like, I'm curious how you kind of first got your foot in the door. Like, what were kind of the first jobs you started taking when you were in LA, and how did you I know as you scored a lot of shorts and then you kind of moved into features. So I'm curious what that journey was like for you, kind of as a younger composer, just getting kind of trying to get your career started.
Yeah, that's something that people ask me about, like younger composers want to know, like, how do I start or how do I get going in this industry? And there's no one answer. The USC program, which is now called the screen scoring, I think it's a master's in screen scoring. When I was doing it, it was scoring for motion pictures and television, SMPTV. And that was a really great stepping stone, because coming to LA, not knowing a soul, I barely ever met anybody who did film composing before coming to LA. But then on day one, put in a room with 19 other students and a bunch of teachers who all they want to do is give you their knowledge and perspective and inspiration, and suddenly you're part of this community that I was never a part of before, and that was a huge help. And the guidance that a program like that gives you on, these are the different people that you should know or could know, these are different types of roles in the film, music, and filmmaking world, everything from music editors to orchestrators and copyists. And man, they just took us around town, different scoring stages, different composer studios, met so many great composers. And just really, you don't know what you don't know, and they fill in those gaps really well. Like, oh, this is a really good foundation to get started. One of those teachers was Christopher Young, legendary composer. And when I came out of USC, my first job was actually at Starbucks, which must have thrilled my parents to go into student loan debt to work at Starbucks. But
Yeah.
that was just for the summer after to get my footing. And then Christopher Young was looking for an assistant for his class, the one that I had just taken the previous year. So I I think me and one other student applied for that job because we all love Chris. Chris
Yeah.
is great. But you know, he had a tendency at the time, not so much anymore, but he was kind of quick fused to say, and so not too many people were interested in taking that job. But I thought if I could go work for Chris, and if I could survive working for Chris, then I could work for anybody. And there was some truth to that. But so I spent the next 3 years working for him part time while I did my own shorts and features, all the while having a reasonable part-time paycheck to pay the bills. And
Yeah.
the continuous education of working for someone like Chris was invaluable in starting my career.
That's awesome. Yeah, Chris, he's so generous with like his knowledge. I mean, just has his reputation of just trying to help everyone. I mean, I've seen him at signings and events, just handing out his cell phone to like people who are trying to like, he's great.
Absolutely, to anybody. And he always says that, if you're ever going to quit, call me first so I can meet you at the airport and tackle you and prevent you from getting on that plane and going back home, because you need to give this a real shot.
Yeah.
You got to give it time and give it a shot.
Yeah, he's a great soul. I love Chris so much. Well, let's I want to jump into before we talk about Supercell, which is an amazing score that you just recently did. But before we jump into that, I'd love to talk about kind of your general approach. I know this is going to like differ depending on what project you're working on, but in general, I'm curious where the first note comes from for you. Where do you love to start for inspiration? Do you love to watch that first locked cut? Do you like to, if you're lucky enough to be early on, read the script? Do you like to just sit with the director first? Do you just like to noodle away from picture first? Like, where does like kind of the first part of your process that you typically like to do?
Wow. You already kind of hit the nail on the head, where the real answer is it depends, because every project, no matter what, is going to be incredibly unique in its own dramatic and music needs. The director or producers or studio that you're trying to please, how much time you have, how much money you have in the budget, and all that really dictates the process for me. Like in general, what I always try to do at the beginning, no matter what, if I can say it in blanket terms, is create a sort of toolbox to draw from. And that could mean thematic material, melodies. It could mean a certain instrumental or sonic palette. It could mean a bunch of sound design and weird, textures and effects, and just kind of a general aesthetic for the score. Either way, I'm just trying to get into that, like I said earlier, about parameters. And I had a composition professor who called it the Stravinsky box, because you can't just start anything, even in the concert world. You can't just start with just an open slate. It's just too daunting and it's too nebulous. You have to have some sort of parameters. Oh, this certain length and this certain ensemble and this style. So generally, the movie itself, or what the director said, or the temp music has kind of pushed me in one direction, and then from there develop that toolbox, spending however amount of time, a week or a couple days, or more. In Supercell, definitely more. Coming up, just setting up the computer template, the DAW template, digital audio workstation, for those who don't know. Just setting that template up and that workflow, that is the beginning of the whole process. So you're not just designing a score, you're designing a workflow at the beginning, or at least I am, excuse me.
Yeah.
So, and that workflow is really gonna, and even choosing what technology to use. I work in a bunch of different programs depending on the nature of the material and depending on what the score is going to be like. So I just have my favorite tools for different types of jobs. So just figuring that out really dictates how the rest of the project is going to go.
Absolutely. So let's jump into Supercell, because you did such a beautiful score for this movie that kind of really throws us back to the the stuff that we grew up with and has kind of an old fashioned feel, but still feels modern and kind of fits to the story that it's telling. And, you know, for people like me who grew up with movies like Twister and stuff like that, it just feels like, I don't know, just it just brings back that great way of what scores kind of used to be like in the 90s and early 2000s. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And for us older folks, the 80s, and
yeah,
even before that, you know,
yeah, absolutely.
melody should be a timeless thing, and somehow it got forgotten a little bit, you know, around, I want to say around 2008, 2009, just as
Yep.
I was
Yeah.
starting to emerge in this industry. Everything that I had trained for and everything that I had wanted to do to get into film music, it kind of went out the window a little bit. I remember one of my first features that I had done was called Shadow People, and Jamie Winterstern, the director of Supercell, he was the editor on that, and he for our director Matt Arnold, and he put like Clint Mansell's Moon and Trent Reznor, Atticus Ross Social Network from top to bottom, and this was a completely different thing for me than I had
Yeah.
ever done, because I was used to orchestra and melody, and now everything's synth and pulse and vibe versus, you know, melody. So it was an adjustment for sure.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned your director James Winterstern, Herbert James Winterstern, who directed uh Supercell, but so you do have a previous relationship with him because he also scored his series Siberia that he directed. And so, and you mentioned he was an editor on another film. So I'm curious, when did you first meet him and what was it like? What were kind of the first steps that you guys talked about when you started on Supercell?
Yeah, it was, you know, I hope that Jamie and I continue to work forever and that he becomes big hotshot director and I can be his right hand man for all time, because that would be the Hollywood story that we all hope for when you
Right.
meet somebody in school and at USC, and I scored a student film. We were introduced by a mutual friend. I scored a student film of his, and we just hit it off really well. We After USC, he did this long short, you know, like 30 minutes, so not like 6 minutes, but this
Right.
long short called Son of a Don. It actually didn't have any score in it, but it had a lot of needle drops, a lot of soundtrack, what do you call it,
Just songs. Yeah.
song, source music was the term I was
Source
looking for.
music. Yeah.
Either source music or just needle drops, yeah, songs. And um you know, so I did some music editing on that. You know, I had never actually done any music
Oh,
editing,
wow.
my own projects, but you know, just to help out, just to be, you know, part of the team around the process, I did some music editing on that. And you know, we just kind of been friends and collaborators this whole time. When he edited Matt Arnold's Shadow People, I I gave him some music to put in the temp as well. And I remember he called me. He's like, Matt, the director, he's over at my house reviewing, you know, the cut. You know, why don't you stop by? And I just would happen to show up, and I met the director, and then we hit it off. I ended up scoring that film, and then Matt created the show Siberia, which Jamie directed a few episodes, and you know, he invited me on to do that as well. So in between Siberia and Siberia and not Shadow People and Supercell, a lot of S's in here.
Yeah.
Jamie launched a production company called Swipe Market with Kevin Radin, and you know, they did some brand marketing, some like video production for companies like HPE, and you know, we continued to score those projects whenever they could get the budget or the creative investment into an original score for. I mean, Jamie loves doing these high concept pieces,
Yeah.
and you know, doing some grand orchestral music to sell computer server software is, you know, it was great. But then yes, so it was never, I like to say that it was never any like doubt that I would get to score his feature debut of
Yeah.
Supercell. And when he came up with the idea, you know, he came to me pretty early, and it was 3 years before they even rolled camera that we started working on themes. We just wanted to have
Wow.
strong themes and memorable themes, and have that main theme, that one hook that hopefully burrows into your brain. We wanted that locked really early, so that once we got into the scoring process, we would already have that base, that that starter toolkit that I mentioned, and we wouldn't have to quote unquote waste time during our scoring window. We would already have those themes in place.
Absolutely. So I mean, Supercell, like, talk to me about working on a movie like this, that's a little bit lower budget, more indie kind of an, indie production that's not some, $200 million blockbuster. And you're taking kind of
Oh,
a pretty big approach with your score, and you wanted to be kind of big and bold. So I'm curious, how, as a composer, do you manage the budget that you're working with, and to make sure that it just fits with the film that you guys are working on?
yeah. So Jamie, very ambitious director, and he's admitted that he was a little naive with his lofty goals, thinking I can make this $60 million movie on a $5 million budget.
Right.
I'll just find a way to do it. I'll will it into existence. And there are some shortcomings in the film because of the budget restrictions, but for the most part, he captured the essence, and that was a big word for us. He captured the essence of what he was trying to accomplish, even though he had to reduce his setups on most days and change. He had storyboarded like the whole movie, but he didn't get to do like 75% of those shots, and he had to
Yeah.
come up with, on the day, he had to come up with new ways. We have 3 hours to get this done. How are we going to do it? What are we going to do? And the same thing applied to the music. He asked me years in advance, what kind of budget would this take to do, this orchestral score top to bottom? And I gave him a number, and he fought his hardest with, for music budget, but at the
Yeah.
end of the day, nothing in post got what we needed and what we deserved. So we had to figure out how to do what we wanted to do, but on a fraction of the
Right.
budget. Even though when I started in 2008, like computer mock-ups, synth mock-ups as they call them, using orchestral samples to simulate the sound of the orchestra, they weren't that great back then, and I certainly wasn't very good at producing a convincing mock-up. I always like to do a good enough job to show a director this is what it could sound like, and then get in front of the orchestra, and that's when it comes alive.
Right.
Thankfully, in the last 15 years, there have been a lot of improvements and a lot of advances in the sound of orchestral mock-ups, and I've gotten more adept at doing them. So, even though some of the music in Supercell is completely sample based out of the box, out of the computer, I think it still sounds pretty good and it's pretty convincing.
Yeah.
Um, there are key moments though that we knew music would be featured, or we needed to get that extra level of emotion or energy from the real live orchestra, and so we allocated pretty efficiently, specific scenes or even segments of scenes, like this 20 seconds here, this 30 seconds here, this 1 minute cue, and that's the stuff that we recorded with the full orchestra. And then on a lower tier, we did a string ensemble for like another half dozen cues. And then below that, we did what's called sweetening, where you'll record a handful of, anywhere from a soloist to a handful of instruments. We did a woodwind quartet that really spiced up a lot of cues that were otherwise completely synthesized. And there's a lot of flute solos in the movie, so we had to get those in real life, and you can feel the emotion in the playing as opposed to just very stale computer-based music.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I love that approach to get around that. You see that obstacle, and it's like, oh, we can't have a fully, full orchestra. We can, and just pick the moments that really need it. I mean, that's a great way to adapt thinking. And the reason why I love these kind of smaller films is that the filmmaking spirit is so alive. Like when I see, like, I hear you talk about it, or hear you talk about Jamie, and like trying to get the shots, and even though he has big ambitions, like, but that's like reminds me of like being in film school, and just like, oh yeah, we just go for it, let's get it, just try to get it done. And which you don't see, or you don't feel in kind of the more big studio stuff. It just feels very processed and product like. And even though movies like this might have shortcomings or feel like smaller, but there's still that energy behind it. That's why I love watching like low budget, like especially in the 80s and 90s, just like horror movies too, kind of have that, like, even though they might not be the best, but they're just like, oh my god, this is like the passion in there, and you just feel it coming through. So I'm curious. Oh,
Before we
sorry.
talk, before we talk about me anymore or Supercell, you know, what you're saying right now is exactly what is happening right now to the Daniels, and
Yeah.
they we have yet to see, and I'm really excited to see what they do with this Universal overall deal that they signed, because for the first time they're going to have a real budget to execute, and I'm excited to see if it means they can now do everything they want to do bigger, better, more,
Right.
or if some of that spirit of how do we do this on our budget, if some of that gets lost in the bigger machine of the studio versus the indie world. So we have yet to see, but I'm excited.
Yeah, I've been waiting for like, I love that you brought the Daniels up, because that was like, I was like, this will reawaken my like energy, and I have faith in like, kind of filmmaking again, just seeing that movie rise to the level that it did and become as popular as it did. And they did it. Yeah, it was, I mean, they filmed in pretty much like one or two locations. A lot of it's practical. Four people did the visual effects. Most of it was, practical. I interviewed the composers, Sun Lux. They're great. They did everything during the pandemic. They didn't have music editors. They were just, just scraping by trying to get it done. And I thought, we need like a new, like a new wave, like a new French wave to like a new, to kind of revitalize, get those original voices kind of back in behind the camera. And I think what you pointed out is like, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they do that. Yeah.
And just to swing this back around, the music mixer for Everything Everywhere, Satoshi Noguchi, he is someone that I've been working with for a long time, and
Oh
he did
wow,
a bunch of album mixing for Supercell. So
that's
all of
awesome.
my favorite tracks that I front loaded the album with orchestra and strings, all mixed by Satoshi, and he's amazing.
That's awesome. That's incredible. So, yeah, talk to me about the score of Supercell. What was your, if you had any, we talked about kind of our inspirations that we loved growing up. Did you draw from any composers that you loved? How did you try to make sure that it still was kind of your voice? What did you want to say with the score? And how did you balance, it is a disaster movie, but all disaster movies, natural disaster movies have the characters that carry everything. So how do you balance kind of the big, more bombastic action stuff with maybe more of the more emotional core of the film?
Well, to answer that last bit, I'm not sure I had to think about that. If it's an action scene, I wrote action music. If it's an emotional, dramatic scene, I wrote emotional, dramatic music. Is that oversimplifying what you're trying to ask a little bit? Maybe.
Yeah.
Um, but oh my God, I got lost in my own whatever there. What were
Oh
you
no,
trying to say?
no,
Yes.
yeah, I'm just curious, yeah, just structurally with the score, what did you, what did you want to do, I guess? What kind of sonic palette did you want? I mean, we talked about a lot of the composers we grew up listening to. Did you draw from any scores that you loved? How did you make sure that it was still kind of your voice as a composer?
Right.
And what did you want to do with, what did you want, I guess, the goal of the score to be in the film?
I mean, I think it's pretty obvious to anyone who's seen the movie that the director, that Jamie, he wanted to get this Spielberg essence on film, and
Yeah.
part of a Spielberg film is inevitably a John Williams score. So I really, it was almost impossible not to draw on John Williams' legacy for this, because when you think of great themes in movie music, he's probably at the top of the list. It also didn't help that Jamie tempt like 90% of the movie with John Williams scores. And he would just send me Spotify playlists full of John Williams, like this moment from E.T. and this thing from Close Encounters. There's Back to the Future as well, and Cocoon, and there was even some Avatar in the temp music a little bit. Like, there was some of our other favorites from Silvestri and Horner. And we talked about Backdraft and Apollo 13. So a lot of Jurassic Park. There was just
Yeah.
all those 90s movies. And, I think that even if aesthetically something is similar to, some those great scores, I think when you have your own individual themes, it ends up being, a very personal score of, like you said, it comes from our voice. I keep
Yeah.
saying, I'll say our voice, because everything I did was filtered through Jamie, as is any composer and director working together. So, I think Jamie and I come from two different sides a lot. Like, Jamie loves things pretty minimal
Mm.
and simple and clear. And I like things a little bit more ornamented and, whatever. So meeting in the middle was good for both of us.
Yeah.
especially for me, where he helps rein in the musical ideas, he helps focus them, he helps get to the essence of it, and so I think all of our themes are just completely our own, and therefore, it becomes its own score. Yes, does it evoke sounds of John Williams or Alan Silvestri? Sure, but that's just inspiration,
Yeah.
hopefully not plagiarism.
No, no,
Yeah.
not at all. Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, I think we're all sponges and we're all, just taking everything that we love and filtering it through ourselves. And I think the score speaks for itself. As I mean, it feels of your voice, and it doesn't feel like a copy paste or anything. And it was like a refreshing breath of fresh, it was a breath of fresh air to hear something like this original, like in, 2023, and just like, oh yeah, this is what music can actually do. So you mentioned the having that kind of that big central theme, that kind of something that kind of is an earworm that kind of hooks the audience and kind of can provide the structure for the score. So I'm curious, talk to me about creating that central theme. Was that one of the first things you did for Supercell? And what was your process? Like, what were you drawing from the film to evoke that theme?
It was the thing we started with. Funny enough, the first theme that we had approved was written for Zane, for Alec Baldwin's character.
Mm,
It didn't actually end up making it into the film because we did this really early. I asked Jamie if I could read. Once he had gotten the script done, I read it, and we did kind of a semi spotting session against the script. You
mm,
know, as if we were scoring a movie, but scoring a script, because this was
right.
during the pandemic. There was some time, and yeah, like I said, we both wanted to get on this really early. So I just started writing themes against the script, and I've never really done that before. I've been completely rewired to react to picture. How the picture looks, how it feels, the pacing, all those things influence what kind of music I think should go in it. And so to write against kind of imaginary images in my head was a much different process. And as far as the Supercell main theme went, I don't know how many I went through in the beginning that were discarded, by Jamie, and eventually I started thinking about Americana, wide
Mm,
open spaces, and Tornado Alley in the Central Plains, uh, and I think some of my early sound experiments or music experiments for this ended up having kind of a Thomas Newman-y kind of vibe to it. He has a great Americana feel to a lot of
yeah.
his music. And if to get slightly technical, like the first three notes of the Supercell theme, da 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 da, this open, not major, not minor sound, and there's a lot of big leaps, a lot of open sounds. The pioneered, maybe I hope pioneered is the wrong word, but Copeland-esque, that kind of Americana vibe. And yeah, so when Jamie went to Texas to shoot random footage of storms and lightning, and he took his friend Johnny Wachter, who makes an appearance in the hotel scene in the movie, they just did this proof of concept footage, like test shoot, and they filmed tons of great stuff. And he edited it into kind of a music video type thing. And I actually scored that about 2 years before they started filming the movie.
Oh
And
wow.
that's where we really started trying to get the main theme like approved and in the can. Before that, we had done a bunch of experiments, but nothing really stuck. Finally, we had some picture. It was kind of a story, even though it was like a 2-minute video. And yeah, I wrote these first three notes, and Jamie picked up on that and said, I love that. And then I started
Yeah.
to try to develop it from there into something that was a melody, and that, we finally got the first full phrase done, and he loved it. And then I'm like, how does it develop from there? And he needs to go somewhere else. He needs to do something else. And I kept trying, and he kept saying, no, 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 no. He's like, what if you just repeat it? I'm like, Jamie, you can't just repeat it. It's got to do something different. And then I did this modulation. I changed keys, but then I did repeat it exactly. And he's like, that's it. Play it once, play it again. He just wanted, this is where his desire for things being simple and just getting to the core of an idea. Like once you hear a great thing, you can play it again, Sam, as if you will.
That's awesome. That's such an amazing process. I'm curious, is there other than the central theme, are there any I know you said you front loaded the album with some of your favorites. Are there any like favorite moments or favorite themes or motifs that you just absolutely were so creatively rewarding to work on in this film?
I mean, a lot of the themes, other than the themes that we developed during the movie, were not set out to be themes. They were more, I would score a cue and doing it with a melodic intent. You know, little motifs or melodies just kind of pop out of that approach. And so Jamie would listen to a cue and he would say, "What's that? You know, those four notes or that phrase." He's like, "I love that." He's like, "Repeat that, play that again, put that in this part of the movie, put in that part of the movie." And that's really where most of our little motifs were born, when he would figure out the things that he loved, and I could then start building that house of cards. You know, where a scene where approaching a new cue is like, okay, well, if this character is doing this, then it's this legacy theme or it's this storm theme, and then putting those in place and then building the cue around those ideas.
Wow, that's awesome. I mean, I just want to, I mean, congratulations again to just the getting the score done, and you know, the way you guys executed it is just, as I mentioned, a breath of fresh air. And yeah, I mean, you must be so, I'm just so proud about it. So yeah, congratulations.
I'm proud of it too. Yeah, I don't think there's anything that I put this much into, because we spent, you know, years on it, and then we started to score against a fine cut in, I want to say, well, October of 2022, 2021, excuse me. And then they didn't lock cut till January. And then by that time, a lot of things had changed. So some of the things we had done against the picture even had to get thrown out and redone and rearranged. And finally, we put like a 12-week window in 2022, in January to March, or February to April, I forget. But yeah, we put like a 12 weeks schedule in, which is unheard of a lot of days. Like, I have
Yeah,
some film scoring texts that discuss, well, this is how you lay out your 12 weeks. This is how you do a score in 12 weeks. But I haven't had 12 weeks, let alone 2 years, to work on a score ever. You know, they just don't have budgets for that at indie level most of the time. And to be fair, we really didn't have it here either. But out of pure passion and collaborative spirit, we just did it. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I think it's great to see movies like this. You know, I think the term direct to video is no longer relevant anymore, because I think streaming is just it's allowing video, I mean, movies that are technically maybe, you know, 10, 15 years ago, maybe not, you know, great for theatrical release, to find a bigger audience. And I'm seeing, as we mentioned with the Daniels, we're seeing that filmmaking spirit is alive in this kind of indie film world still, in these lower budget films. And the way the kind of, there's that middle class of filmmaking for me has kind of disappeared, and it's just like giant blockbusters and then what's going on kind of down here. But it just like makes me kind of hopeful for like the future of filmmaking and new voices. So I mean, Corey, I want to thank you for sharing everything today and talking about that. And before we wrap up, you know, I know we mentioned you know, some of the things that younger composers are asking you about getting started and everything. And since we are living this kind of time of change in our industry, and we're kind of living through shifting mergers and the streaming bubble popping, I'm curious if you could give like one or two pieces of advice to a new composer who's entering this world. What would you, from what you learned in your career, what would you give out, you know, those two pieces of advice?
Well, the thing about going to USC, or like a Berkeley, or there's some other film scoring programs around the country, around the world, really. It's not that that is essential. What all it really does is condense what you need to be doing when you start off your career. It condenses like 5 years maybe into 1 year. This is something that Chris Young always says, and I wholeheartedly agree. Because, like I said, you don't know what you don't know. You have to figure that out as
Right,
you
right.
go. You know, I rhyme some of the time, as they say. So you just have to go out and meet people, pretty much. You have to
Yeah.
find other composers, you have to find filmmakers, you have to find anybody in any walk of the film industry that hopefully will talk to you, and then hopefully you can become friends with, and they can become fans of yours. That's that line of like having a fan who's a friend and a champion of like what you do, that's really kind of the key, because they're the ones that will promote you to the next person and the next person. And really, when I started out, that's what I did. As after scoring a bunch of shorts at USC, now I had this group of people that um, I hope really appreciated what I did. And then, finding out if they're working on anything, or if they're working on something for somebody else, and well, they recommend me for that job, and then just building out from there slowly and slowly. Um, and yeah, it certainly, like being at USC, sped that up. But if you can do that from anywhere in the world with the internet, and yeah.
Yeah, no, it's
I
I mean,
and
and no, yeah, I mean, we mentioned the soundtrack community in LA is like, it's a small, it's big, but it feels small because it's everyone is there supporting each other. And if you're in Los Angeles, you can join the SCL and go to functions and bump elbows with other people in the industry and get advice. But even if you're not in Los Angeles, there's so many things online on Facebook groups that are big, for like the Perspective Forum. And yeah, I encourage any young composer who's looking for that, like, you will find support around you. Like, it's there. And it's yeah, and it is good to be in that kind of community. It definitely helps instead of doing it alone.
and 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 I'll just say, you need an education, and I don't mean that in the academic university sense. I mean, you have to put in the time, whether it be 5 years, 10 years, or more, to learn. And there's a lot of ways to do that. Being an assistant for a composer and learning the ropes from him or her. Online videos. Back when I was a young pup, they had these things called isolated score tracks on DVDs, which I'm sure you
Yeah.
know well. I doubt some people today have even heard of that. But things like The Matrix and Blade and Dark Crystal, like you wouldn't know it, but you wouldn't expect it, but you get a DVD and they have in the special features isolated score tracks. And remember soundtracks.net, they used to
Oh
have like
yeah.
a of all the DVDs that had these, and just watching a movie with the score isolated, what a great resource. And now there's people doing film score analysis on YouTube, where they show the movie and the score and the kind of scrolling in the background. I mean, what a great way to kind of learn what's going on behind the picture with the music. So however you get an education, whether it's through your own trial and error, through school, through online resources, just talking to people one by one, and finding out what they do and how they do it. You need to get an education.
Yeah, yeah, those isolated score tracks it's a great way to see how the score is working, the shape of it, how it shapes to the edit, how it shapes to the scene pacing. And there are thankfully a few. I'm still a physical guy. Like, I still buy my Blu-rays, and I have 4K Blu-rays. And there are still, thankfully, every now and then you get a little treat. I think Lauren Balfe did an isolated score for his Mission Impossible, and I think Joe Kramer had an isolated score track for that as well. So there's every now and then you'll get something like big and bold like that kind of, you can really study the shape of the music. But yeah, those are absolutely amazing points, Corey. But thank you so much. I think we've covered so much today. It was such a pleasure and treat to talk with you and get all your insights. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kai. It's been great. Yeah, thanks for having me.